Welcome to this recorded lecture of ethics and values, learning to live with graceful presence. I'm Professor Nielsen. Today we'll be talking about obstacles to graceful presence. And with that, I want to remind you that we're taking what I've called a phenomenological approach. We're beginning with people, with us, as we concretely experience the world. How we experience our feelings, our thoughts, our desires in our body. And then from there, we're going to explore how to live well with ourselves in our own bodies. But again, this phenomenological approach begins with this concrete examination of how we inhabit our bodies and how we experience, again, our feelings, thoughts, and desires in our bodies. Again, as I've said before, a key problem is we don't know how to live well in our own bodies with our complicated feelings, our confusing thoughts, and contradictory desires. So we have, as I talked about last time, this guarded self-consciousness where we tend to be present to life in each moment, full of self-doubt, a sense of inadequacy, anxiety. So we react to what happens to us, as puppets on, the strings of our emotions, controlled by what happens to us, powerless to deal well with what we're experiencing, leading to regret and dissatisfaction. And so this failure to live our best possible life. And again, this is where ethics and philosophy can be helpful. I think ethics and philosophy are the only disciplines that teach you how to live well with your body, with your feelings, thoughts, and desires. It begins, and it also helps us, as this art of being human. We learn how to respond to our being human. And as I've said before, it's learning how to live with this graceful presence, right? And I mentioned this thought that this phenomenological approach invites us to begin to pay attention to your embodiment, to begin to pay attention to how you experience your feelings, thoughts, and desires in your own body. So you have to begin to pay attention introspectively to how you experience the world. Now, embodiment itself, we might say that it's this idea that all of your desires and thoughts and feelings are rooted in your body, right? They're established deeply in your body and its presence in the environment. And only by understanding this can you begin to become the author of your own life and not just a mere victim of what happens to you. So today, we're going to explore the root cause of our anxieties and insecurities, right? Why our feelings are so, complicated, our thoughts so confusing, and our desires so contradictory. So let's begin then with an insight that is simple to understand, even if it takes a while and lots of work to master it. And it's an idea that's incredibly important to understand. So I would encourage you to listen closely. If you can always pause the recording and go back and think about it and listen to it again. But let's begin with the most simple and basic idea from evolutionary biology, right? Your body was designed for mobility, for movement, specifically to move away from threats to your well-being and towards opportunities. And your brain was designed to coordinate that movement by the stick and carrot method, of pain and pleasure. So expectations and the experience of threats cause pain, and the expectation and experience of opportunities, right, cause pleasure. Now, there are 3 books that I love that really unpack this to a popular audience. One is the book called The Domesticated Brain by Bruce Hood. The other is a book called Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst by Robert Spilowski. And then finally, a book by Guy Claxton with a C called Intelligence in the Flesh. These books really unpack this notion that our body was designed for mobility, for movement, and our brains to coordinate that movement. And also they introduce you to this incredibly important idea. It's called the law of approach and avoidance. And it is as universal and constant as the law of gravity is in physics, right? Yet, if you understand the law of gravity, you can do things that seem to defy gravity, right? Like sending the space shuttle into space. Well, similarly, when you come to understand this law of approach and avoidance, you'll also be able to do just fantastic things, right? The ability to maintain peace of mind in any and all circumstances. And that's where we want to kind of get to in this course, right? Now, it gets a bit more complicated, so keep that in mind, that our bodies were designed for movement and our brains to coordinate that movement with the, pain and pleasure, to move towards opportunities and away from threats. And here's where it gets complicated. Now, for many animals, their well-being is entirely, right, physical. It's all about their survival and reproduction. So the primitive brain, the amygdala system, works through, fight, freeze, flee, feed, and fornicate instincts. And we have the amygdala system, and you experience it every time you feel threatened. Some animals are social, so their well-being is two-tiered, both the physical level of survival and reproduction, and the social level of cooperation and relationships, where the limbic system of the brain, right, the emotional centers of the brain, respond to rejection. They experience it as physical pain, and the limbic system responds to acceptance, right, as physical pleasure. Now, we humans are unique. There might be other higher animals, but humans have a third level of meaning and purpose. Let's call it the existential level. At this level, our well-being consists of meaningful freedom or control over our lives. So threats, right, of no control or threats of losing control cause us to experience physical pain, and opportunities to gain control we experience as physical pleasure. Now, this is why COVID-19 has been so stressful and full of anxiety for most of us, because it attacks us on all three levels, right? Physically, the coronavirus is a threat of getting sick and dying. Socially, right, it's the quarantine or the loss of relationships. And existentially, there's a sense that you lose control over your lives. Maybe all of those who resist wearing masks, even though they can help stop the spread, are simply responding to this threat of loss of control without their knowing why they're doing it. So it's important then to realize that our bodies and brains move us away from threats, whether physical harm or death, or social rejection, or the existential loss of control. And our bodies and brains move us towards opportunities for food, sex, acceptance, control, and meaningful freedom. And our brains have to decide in seconds what counts as threats or opportunities. And this in many ways depends upon biology, culture, and history, which maybe at a later date we'll have to explore. But I want to keep going in this direction of understanding the law of approach and avoidance and how it helps explain our complicated feelings, confusing thoughts, and contradictory desires. Because this is where it gets kind of tricky, this being human, right? Now think about this, right? Now, what might be a threat at the physical level may very well be an opportunity at the social level. So, for instance, risking your life or physical harm or to save someone, right? Or giving up sex, becoming celibate in some religious order, might bring you greater social acceptance, even though they're a threat at the physical level. Similarly, what might be a threat at the social level may be an opportunity at the existential level. For instance, maybe your family or society wants you to be a particular type of person, and you need to be that person to be accepted, right? Yet to do so is to give up who you really are, to surrender control over your own life. So you kind of get the picture, whether or not those examples worked. But you see how our feelings are complicated, our thoughts can be confusing, and our desires can be contradictory, because our brain can be at war with itself, in conflict, right, between these three levels. So many of us are in a constant state of anxiety. Anxiety, is a physical state characterized by feelings of stress and tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure, rapid heartbeat, dizziness, sweating, and the desire to escape the situation that we're in. And anxiety is produced, right? Anxiety is produced by our brain when it perceives threats, opportunities, or unknowns, or nearly everything we experience, right, in this world can cause our brains to produce anxiety. And we make bad choices under the influence of anxiety, right? Decisions that harm ourselves, decisions that harm our relationships, decisions that cause conflict, violence, and war. Practically all of the problems that we humans face in the world arise from our failure to understand our bodies, arise from our inability to live well with ourselves in our own skin. In this course, we're going to examine the greatest thinkers of our human tradition to learn how to live well in our own skin, right? Learning how to, as we've said, live with graceful presence. Now, let me introduce to you one of the first thinkers I want to talk about in this sense. And his name was Michel de Montaigne. I read Michel de Montaigne. He was a French philosopher and essayist. I read his essays, and it was reading Michel de Montaigne's essays that I had a better insight into how our inability to live well with ourselves, right, manifests this guarded self-consciousness, that this inability to live well with ourselves, it gives us a presence that's haunted by self-doubt, a sense of inadequacy, dissatisfaction, and that fearful anxiety. So we're hesitant and timid, too hesitant and too timid to really engage life. Montaigne also helped me realize that guarded self-consciousness does not make us happy, so we seek to overcome it by pursuing things we think will make us happy, like wealth or popularity, etc. But this becomes a cruel optimism and just a different obstacle to genuine happiness. The way to overcome guarded self-consciousness, our anxieties, is not lay outside ourselves, but within us, by understanding how to live well with our bodies, right? By cultivating graceful presence. But let me get a little bit deeper into Michel de Montaigne. Now, he retired, you see his dates, 1533 to 1592. He retired to his castle, his chateau in France, when he was 35 years old. He wanted to engage in self-examination, and he probably examined himself, every aspect of himself, of his body, his feelings, his thoughts, his desires. He examined them more so than I think anyone else, perhaps in the history of humanity. He thought that if he could better understand himself, he would be able to better understand others and help them live better lives. And so I think that might have been in the earlier phrase. He said, every man has within himself the entire human condition. So Montaigne thought the better that he understood himself, which in a sense was the only thing that he could understand, but the better he understood himself, right, because we have this shared humanity, the more he could understand others. Again, the more he could understand himself, the more he would understand others. And so he began this process of self-examination, and he thought that he had discovered the three main causes of our insecurities, right? Our anxieties. And let me just go over quickly with you the three causes of our insecurities that Michel de Montaigne thought we had. Number one, he thought that our body and bodily functions make us feel insecure. Most of us, when we look in the mirror, see something we don't like about our bodies, right? We're overly negative and critical about our appearance. We're not comfortable or confident with our bodies. We think we're too short, too tall, too skinny, too fat, too whatever. And then our bodily functions embarrass us. The smells, the sounds, the involuntary actions add to our sense of insecurity. So he kind of points it out humorously, I think, in these two aphorisms. He says, even on the highest throne in the world, we are still sitting on our ass. Kings and philosophers shit, and so do ladies. He was trying to get us to think about and confront our bodies without feeling insecure about it, about feeling weird. Another cause of our insecurities, he thought, was our intellect. We don't think that we're smart enough, that we're talented enough. We think to ourselves, if people really knew me as I know myself, they'd see I'm a fake, I'm an imposter, right? Because other people seem to be so much smarter than me, better educated, better read. He says we're all blockheads, but we become insecure about our intellects, right? Along those lines, he said, to compose our character is our duty, not to compose books and to win not battles and provinces, but order and tranquility in our conduct. Our great and glorious masterpiece is to live appropriately. All ruling, hoarding, building are only appendages and props at most. There you can see him looking forward to, as we'll see in a moment, some strategies to overcome this insecurity about our intellects. And then finally, he thinks we're insecure about our status. We have status anxiety. We're always comparing ourselves to others in a negative way that makes us resentful or feel inferior. We compare the best of others with the worst of ourselves, right? We compare their best with our worst, especially if we spend a lot of time on social media. And those comparisons, that status anxiety, again, contributes to our insecurity. Now think about that for a moment, right? The three main causes of our insecurities in life, our guarded self-consciousness in a sense, is the insecurity we feel about our bodies and bodily functions, the insecurity we have about our intellects, and the insecurity about our status vis-a-vis others. Now, I don't know about you, but I've found all of these insecurities in myself, and I've experienced how they feed into my own guarded self-consciousness. And when it comes down to it, again, it's simply more evidence that it's our inability to live well with ourselves in our own skin, right? It's our inability to live well with our feelings, thoughts, and desires that is the major cause of our unhappiness. Now, Montaigne did have a few ideas to help us and help himself overcome these insecurities. Let me just share with you some of those ideas. So, to overcome the insecurity we might have about our body, he suggested that we observe small children and animals. Now, Montaigne, his castle was actually a working farm, so he was very much observed and liked animals. And he thought that as he looked at animals, he noticed that they had no kind of guarded self-consciousness. They had no shame or hang-ups about their body or bodily functions. And little children are sort of similar. Right? They're accepting. They're curious, but in a non-judgmental way. It's very refreshing to see, right, how small children and animals perhaps behave in this unself-conscious way. I know that my own grandson, this might be a bit too much, I apologize in advance, but My own grandson, if he has to pee, just drops his pants wherever he is and pees without any. Of course, I'm not suggesting that you do that. There's public urination laws. But, as a little boy, he has no shame in his body or his bodily functions. I know some grown-ups who are so insecure and so embarrassed by their bodily functions that they refuse to use public restrooms, right? They refuse to use the restroom at work, all because there is this sense of embarrassment about their bodily functions. A character exercise that we have that can help us with this. It says, each day try to spend time with a small child or even a cat or a dog and observe how they are able to simply enjoy and be present in the moment and in any activity in which they are involved. Let's go to the next strategy they came up with to overcome, insecurities about our intellect, this imposter syndrome. He suggests that we read biographies and autobiographies of famous and influential people. He says if you do that, right, like if you read about Montaigne, you realize how many insecurities he had about his body and his feelings and his thoughts and so on, and how he overcame those. But if you read these biographies, you realize that even these influential, right, famous people, they all suffer from the very same anxieties and insecurities that we do. Again, it teaches us to be, I think, more compassionate and accepting of ourselves, that we're not different or weird or abnormal, but we're just humans. So a character exercise during the time of this exercise, study the lives of virtuous people by reading their biographies and autobiographies. Write down the traits they possess that you'd like to emulate, and each day do so. Then finally, one last strategy about status, right? To overcome our insecurity about our status, how we compare ourselves to others. He suggested that we travel. This gives you a new perspective on life, to see how different people do things and appreciate things differently. Maybe you feel your house isn't big enough or your car isn't as nice as your neighbor. And then you travel to a different country and you realize it's only Americans who are so irrationally obsessed with large and useless homes, or only us who have a weird fetish or attraction to automobiles. And you can just laugh at how silly it is to, for a family of four to have a house with 8 bedrooms, right? Or a car that is more expensive than most people's homes. Of course, if you can't travel, then just talk with people from all different backgrounds across class and race and religion and sexual orientation. Here's the exercise. Each day go out of your way to meet new people and engage with others whom you would normally not connect. During the time of this exercise, take someone out to lunch with whom you normally don't associate. And my calendar, by the way, is wide open. Just joking. So a few other great aphorisms, then we'll end this. But I kind of like these. You probably, if you read over the aphorisms, have some examples of your own. But I like the one where he says, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened." Boy, I can relate to that. I mean, I know that I have wasted so much time worrying about things that never happened, or if they did happen, it wasn't as bad as I thought they would be. In fact, they oftentimes were really pleasant, great experiences. Maybe you're the same way. You worried about the start of school, spent, maybe weeks, days, nights, stressed out, but then when school starts, you actually enjoy yourself, and then you feel bad that you wasted so much time with worry. This next one, when I dance, I dance. When I sleep, I sleep. Yes, and when I walk alone in a beautiful orchard, if my thoughts drift to far-off matters for some part of the time, for some other part I lead them back, again to the walk, the orchard, to the sweetness of the solitude, to myself, right? I mean, just being present to the activity you're in when you're doing it. This next one reminds me a lot of Socrates. We'll look at soon in the Apology. Whoever will be cured of ignorance, let him confess it. And then I like this last one, right? The most manifest sign of wisdom is continual cheerfulness, right? So Michel de Montaigne, right? This great essayist, philosopher, who discovered causes of our insecurities, right? Our bodies, bodily functions, our intellects, and our status anxiety, all arising again from this inability we have of living well with ourselves and our own skin because we don't understand our bodies and what they do. We've tried to explore that a bit in this lecture. Now, in our next lecture, we'll be talking about graceful presence, right? The key of learning to live well with yourself and your own skin and your own body is cultivating graceful presence so that we can replace self-doubt with calm self-confidence. We can replace, right, a sense of inadequacy with emotional resilience. We can replace dissatisfaction with cheerfulness, and that we can replace fear and anxiety with a loving enthusiasm for life. But that will be our next lecture. Now, in the meantime, I would really encourage you, as we talk about graceful presence and these character exercises, to begin to try a person who can live with graceful presence. I know you can do it. I believe in you, so start today. Now, the quiz that's associated with this lecture has an access code. That access code is 0001. Again, I want to thank you for listening to this, and we'll see you again soon.